I realized that money itself isn't what exhausts me. It's the constant thinking about money every single day that really wears me down. There are months when I don't make any big purchases yet. At the end of the month, I open my banking app and still feel mentally drained because I can't even remember where the money went. A Japanese friend once said something to me that really stayed with me. If you have to think about it every day, then it probably isn't set up properly yet. What they meant was when things are prepared in advance and put in the right place, you don't have to keep using mental energy to control them. From there, I slowly started applying this idea to my meals, housework, and even the way I handle daily spending. In this video, I'll share 9 Japanese ways of saving money, not to restrict yourself, but to make life feel lighter and stop money from quietly leaking away. And the first tip is how they prepare ahead, so tomorrow requires less thinking. The first approach is simple. Prepare ahead, so tomorrow doesn't start with another round of decisions. In Japanese, this way of doing things is called dantori, setting things up in advance so what comes next flows more smoothly. A very familiar example shows up in the kitchen. When I bring home meat or fish, I don't leave it in the original package and toss it into the fridge. I season it right away, divide it into single-use portions, label it simply, and place everything into a designated tray. When it's time to cook, I just take it out and use it. But dantori isn't only about cooking. It's how many Japanese households handle daily life, preparing clothes ahead of time, keeping everyday items in fixed places, and breaking down tasks that repeat again and again. Doing a little extra today means tomorrow doesn't have to carry it in your head. The reason this works is simple. Anything you don't finish today stays with you. Not as a task, but as something you have to keep in mind. It's not hard work that's exhausting. It's having to remember, reconsider, and decide again. For busy people, it's the constant decision-making, not the work itself, that wears you down. The decluttering mindset here isn't about doing more. It's about reducing how much you have to decide each day. When things are prepared and put in the right place, your mind naturally feels lighter. And when your mind is lighter, you're less likely to spend money out of urgency, exhaustion, or just to get things over with. Once you get used to dantori, you start to see that saving money doesn't come from tightening your life. It comes from not letting life constantly rush you. And from this same idea of preparation, the Japanese apply another habit to reduce daily thinking. They don't constantly change their meals. Next, don't overlook the power of repeating familiar meals. Eating the same foods isn't a lack of creativity, it's a way to protect your mental energy. Many households have default meals built into their week. There's no need to write them down, they just know. Certain days are curry, some days are grilled fish with soup, other days might be eggs with boiled vegetables. When it's time to eat, there's no discussion, no polling opinions, and no pressure to change things just to avoid boredom. What matters in Teiban menu isn't the food itself, it's not having to decide again every single day. When something repeats within a clear structure, your mind gets to rest. And when your mind rests, daily, life slows down just a little. I realized that the most exhausting part of meals isn't cooking, it's thinking. Thinking about what to eat, whether everyone will like it, whether it's too repetitive. Once the menu becomes familiar, those questions disappear. Of course, repetition doesn't mean rigidity. Japanese households usually keep the structure but allow small variations within it. Instead of changing the dish every day, they might change the seasoning or cooking method within the same category. Or they use themed days like Soup Monday or Stir Fry Friday. The structure stays the same, but the atmosphere doesn't feel heavy. Meals don't need to be creative every day. They just need to be enough for your mind to rest. When food stops taking up so much mental space, you're also less likely to order takeout simply because you're too tired And once decisions in the kitchen are reduced, the Japanese go on to reduce pressure elsewhere by letting circumstances guide meals instead of desire. Once a stable meal structure is in place, the Japanese add something very practical and quietly grounding eating according to season and price. Instead of starting with cravings or preferences, they start with what's available and reasonable right now. Whatever is affordable becomes the foundation of the meal. Ingredients that are out of season aren't forced into the kitchen, and meals aren't built around personal desire. When vegetables are inexpensive, vegetables take center stage. When fish is in season, fish naturally becomes the main dish. The menu shifts with conditions without resistance. On the surface, this approach sounds almost too simple. But underneath it requires something many of us find difficult: accepting the present situation. Accepting what's available, what's reasonably priced, and what makes sense at this moment, instead of fighting reality to recreate an ideal version of a meal. In Japan, eating according to price isn't seen as deprivation or settling. It's seen as living in alignment with reality. Rather than pushing against circumstances, meals are shaped by them. There's no sense of loss in this only adjustment. When I began eating this way, I noticed I was buying far less. Not because I was restricting myself, but because the urge disappeared. I no longer needed to add expensive ingredients just to make a meal feel complete or impressive. Meals became more flexible, more responsive, and spending felt noticeably lighter. This way of eating also reduced a subtle kind of pressure, the pressure to make meals look or feel like a certain ideal. Once that pressure was gone, I didn't feel the need to compensate with extra purchases. At its core, the idea is simple: meals follow circumstances, not desire. And when I stopped forcing life to match an imagined standard, I also stopped spending money to make up for an imagined lack. From there, it naturally led to another deeply connected Japanese habit. One that shows up not just in food, but in everything else they buy. They don't purchase things to impress. One very Japanese lesson I learned after carefully observing how people live is this: don't buy things for other people to see. This isn't a rule that's loudly stated. It's a quiet attitude reflected in how items are chosen and how people live with them. This mindset is called mie wo haranai, not showing off, not maintaining appearances through possessions. When buying something, the questions aren't, does it stand out? But is it durable? Is it enough? Is it easy to maintain? A good item is one that can quietly exist in daily life without demanding attention. That's why household items tend to be simple. They don't need to impress. They don't need to prove anything. A home is not a stage. And household items don't need to perform. They just need to do their job well. When I stopped buying things to display, I noticed I bought far less. Not because I became frugal, but because I stopped performing inside my own home. I no longer needed objects that made my space look fuller, more stylish, or more put together in someone else's eyes. My belongings started serving my life, not the other way around. From a decluttering perspective, this creates a huge shift. Fewer things to look at, more things to use. The space feels lighter, cleaning becomes easier, and money is no longer spent on items that only feel good in the beginning and then turn into maintenance. When you stop buying to impress, you also stop upgrading constantly. There's no pressure to follow trends or refresh your space for comparison. And this is where saving money becomes natural, not a goal you force, but a result of living according to real needs. From here, Japanese saving habits move deeper into something else, managing money with awareness, without tension, self-blame, or turning life into a heavy calculation. The next habit sounds dull, but it changes the entire rhythm of daily life. Every item has a fixed place. In Japanese, this is called teiichi, the default position of things in your home. The principle is simple. Use it, then put it back. No temporary piles, no, I'll deal with it later. What matters most isn't speed, it's not having to think about where things go. When scissors batteries, papers, and containers all have clear places, you don't have to make decisions anymore. When items don't have fixed places, every use requires thought. Over time, that becomes exhausting. And when you're exhausted, familiar patterns appear, leaving things scattered, buying duplicates for convenience, or repurchasing items you already own but can't find. Money leaves not because you want to spend, but because you can't see clearly what you already have. A home isn't tidy because you clean more, it's tidy because you don't have to think about where things belong. Once everything has a place, the home stays calmer without effort. And more importantly, your mind feels lighter. You stop carrying small questions around all day. Saving here doesn't come from cutting expenses. It comes from not creating false needs, not buying duplicates, not replacing inconvenience with purchases, not spending simply because you're too tired to search. Once belongings become clear, something else needs clarity, to cash flow. And that's when the Japanese move to a habit that's gentle but lasting. After space and belongings are simplified, the Japanese look at money, but in a very different way than most people expect. Instead of immediately cutting back or setting strict savings goals, they start by recording. This practice is called kakeibo, a household spending journal, and its spirit is much lighter than many assume. The core of kakeibo isn't control, it's awareness. You're not recording to force yourself to spend less right away, but to see where your money goes. It doesn't need to be overly detailed or categorized perfectly, just enough to observe the flow. Many people avoid tracking because it feels judgmental. Each expense feels like proof you did something wrong. But in the Japanese mindset, kakeibo has no right or wrong. It's not about blame. It's about observation. And when you allow yourself to observe calmly, adjustment happens naturally. The insight here is simple. Knowing where your money goes brings more peace than not knowing. When you don't know, there's constant low-level tension. When you do know, even without changing anything yet, the feeling shifts. Money stops being a vague source of anxiety. The Japanese don't start with ambitious savings targets. They simply keep recording and reviewing consistently. Over time, that consistency reveals which expenses still fit their current life and which no longer do. And after watching long enough, something becomes clear. There are monthly expenses you're paying that you've almost forgotten exist. Not because they're small, but because they're automatic. That's where the next step comes in. Next is a category that's easy to miss, even though it shows up quietly every single month in visible costs. These are the automatic charges that slip under the radar: utilities, subscriptions, service plans, memberships, and signups you once chose intentionally, but rarely think about anymore. The problem with these expenses isn't their size. Many of them are relatively small on their own. The real issue is that you're no longer aware of them. There's no moment where you actively decide to spend. No checkout page, no hesitation, no second thought. Money simply leaves your account on schedule month after month. That smooth, predictable rhythm is exactly what makes these costs invisible. The core insight here is simple but powerful. Money doesn't disappear because of shopping. It leaks away quietly every month. Because there's no sharp moment of payment, there's also no moment of reflection. Nothing hurts enough to trigger a pause, so nothing gets questioned. The Japanese response to this isn't drastic. They don't rush to cancel everything or strip life down to the bare minimum. Instead, they build a quiet habit of periodically reviewing bills. Not with judgment, but with curiosity. They ask very practical questions. Do I still use this? Does this level still make sense? Is there a just enough option that fits my life now? Not a past version of it when you cancel what you no longer use. The feeling is rarely one of loss. More often, it's a feeling of lightness. That's because in reality, you stopped living with those services long ago. They weren't part of your daily life anymore. They existed only on statements and automatic deductions. At this point, saving money no longer feels like deprivation or sacrifice. It's simply stopping money from flowing toward things that are no longer present in your life. And once cash flow feels clearer and calmer, the Japanese naturally begin to look at how they spend on enjoyment, especially things like eating out with the same quiet awareness. A small change with a big impact, eating out, is no longer the default. For many Japanese people, eating out isn't a solution for busy or exhausting days, it's a reward chosen consciously. Because it doesn't happen often, it keeps its special feeling. When eating out becomes habitual, the enjoyment fades. You still pay, but the meal passes quickly without leaving anything behind. Often, you feel relieved the task is done, not truly rested. But when eating out is less frequent, each time has meaning. You anticipate it, choose a place you like, and actually enjoy it. The insight here is gentle but honest. When something becomes a habit, it stops being a pleasure. Not because it gets worse, but because awareness disappears. This doesn't mean cooking everything at home or forcing rigid rules. The question isn't whether you eat out, it's why. Are you eating out because you want to, or because you're too exhausted to think or prepare? When the second answer happens too often, eating out becomes a way to cope with fatigue rather than a choice. When you stop using eating out to compensate for exhaustion, you don't just save money, you regain a sense of agency. You decide when to rest, when to simplify, and when to treat yourself. And that sense of agency leads to the final habit the Japanese protect carefully: small, repeatable joys. Finally, the most important thing I learned is this: the Japanese don't use saving as a way to make life harder or more deprived. Saving isn't about tightening everything until it hurts. Instead, it's about making sure life still contains small, steady sources of comfort. They intentionally preserve simple joys close enough to repeat every day and familiar enough that they don't require planning money or effort. These joys are often very ordinary. A cup of tea in the morning before the day begins, a short walk around the neighborhood just to stretch your legs, standing quietly for a moment to look at a plant on the balcony, reading a few pages before bed, not to finish a book, but simply to slow down. None of these things are new, impressive, or expensive, but because they repeat, they create a gentle rhythm that supports the day instead of overwhelming it. There's a quiet truth in this. Happiness doesn't need to be new, it needs to be familiar. When something is familiar, it becomes grounding. It reminds you that you already have places to rest without needing to add anything more. When small joys are built into everyday life, the urge to reward yourself with shopping or expensive treats after a tiring day naturally fades. You don't need to spend money to recover because recovery is already there in small, reliable ways. At this point, saving money is no longer something you force yourself to do or constantly think about. It becomes a byproduct of a life that's been arranged more thoughtfully, in rhythm, in emotion, and in daily pace. You move a little slower, think a little less, and spend less without ever feeling deprived. To sum it up, these habits aren't about saving harder, they're about thinking less. When daily life is set up to feel lighter, money naturally stops leaking through stress and rush. If you're busy and mentally overloaded, you don't need more rules. You need fewer things competing for your attention, and that's what these habits help with. In the next video, I'll share reverse decluttering hacks, small shifts that make your space easier to live in without doing big cleanups. If this was helpful, save it or follow along so you don't miss what's next.